Light versus darkness, happiness versus sadness, joy versus depression, good versus evil. When it comes to the spiritual journey, when it comes to life, we often put these, what appears to be opposing forces, up against one another. And we think that one has to occupy space and the other can't, and that one has to beat the other, or that one is trying to destroy the other. But when we are really on this conscious spiritual journey and we take a look at these, what appears to be opposing forces, we begin to get to a point where we recognize that in life, especially this physical reality that we're living in, when we observe the universe, these two forces, what we label as opposing forces, in fact, need one another. So to say one is versus the other, like we often say, light versus dark, right? Good versus evil. When we use that terminology versus, it really pulls us far away from a really profound spiritual realization and understanding. And that understanding is that one is not able to exist without the other. And in fact, they need each other. They are in fact so dependent on each other that it is impossible to separate the two. And this is why this story, this theme, this concept of good versus evil has been in existence since we've been in existence, right? Since the dawn of man and history. So when we understand and get into that realization, that perspective, that understanding of this truth, that they have always been there with each other since the beginning of time, then we get to observe this, contemplate this from the standpoint of looking at the world differently, but also, more importantly, looking at yourself differently, looking within yourself differently. You see, so we usually look at the outside world. We often look at nature, and that often guides us through these realizations. And though that is important, because remember that the universe is a projection, it is a reflection of your own consciousness and your own reality that you're always creating. It is important to recognize these patterns in what we are observing, what we are witnessing, what we are seeing. And when we look at these realities, right, when we come to this understanding, we can then take that into a personal realization. And so when we think about good versus evil or light versus darkness, instead of looking at it as opposing forces, one trying to destroy the other, look at it as a harmony between contrasts, two things that must exist at the same time. Because if one doesn't exist, then the other essentially does not exist. Imagine a world where there is completely light and no darkness. Imagine a world where there is complete darkness and no light. Imagine a world where there is nothing but good, right? Nothing but good. Everything is good. Everything is perfect. Now, yeah, we can go down the rabbit hole of understanding that perfect, good depends on the person. It depends on the subject, right? The person witnessing it. It's a matter of perspective. But when we get into just really understanding and simplifying this concept, when you think about the idea of everything being good for everyone, really, what's the point there, right? Because the idea of things being bad sometimes or going through struggles and challenges allows you to really strengthen who you are, coming into a better understanding as to who you are. It helps in the journey of self-realization, self-actualization, self-awareness. That ultimately means growth. So without the bad, we really wouldn't have the growth. And the growth expresses itself as goodness, right? So that the good and bad of life and the questioning of things being perfect and not being perfect is a matter of your own perspective. But that comes later on in life when you realize that everything is really all good, right? Because you recognize that one needs the other, right? The good, the pleasure, the happiness, the joy needs the suffering, the pain, the depression, the frustration or the anger. You cannot have one without the other. So, okay, let's get to the point here. As you understand this, and as you begin to play with this idea and this concept in your mind, when you realize that darkness and light need each other, right? When you look up at the stars at night, it is what appears to be completely black. And then you see the stars gleaming through, right? One needs the other. The light needs the darkness for the light to be light. The darkness needs the light for the darkness to be dark. When you think about this concept, what I do is I look at the concept of a cup. And in that cup is the light. The cup itself represents the darkness. So the darkness represents an empty space, which is still something. It's still a space, right? It still has material. It still has an essence to it. That's why we call it empty space. It is something there, even though we express it and we articulate it as nothing, but it is actually something, because no thing is still a thing. And then when we think about light, that represents fullness, right? So you can think about darkness representing an emptiness, but it is still something. And the light represents a fullness. So when I think about the concept of light and darkness, I think of darkness being an empty cup, but it's still a cup, even though it's empty. And then the light represents the fullness that fills that cup. And so throughout life, you recognize that everything that we experience when we want to, leave and escape the pain and suffering and the depression and the anger and the frustration, we are essentially looking to fill that emptiness with the joy, the happiness, right? The presence, the understanding of gratitude, all these different things. So we're looking to just feel that emptiness, right? We're looking to substitute the emptiness feeling with a feeling of fullness. And so when we get further deeper into the experiences of life and understanding the contrasts are in fact dependent upon one another, they are not opposing. So it's not a matter of dark versus light. It is just simply a matter of dark with light. You need the two. The two need each other. And when you think about dark versus light as it pertains to the world that you are experiencing, you begin, just like when I mentioned looking at nature as a reflection of self, this same example is a reflection of self, where you look at the darkness and the light are needing one another in the universe, which also means that they need one another within yourself. So as you go through life and you look at the aspects of who you are, oftentimes what people do is we tend to shame, shun, and push away the quote unquote darkness. And we allow, the light to shine through. But the problem is when we want that light to shine through, we want to be quote unquote the best versions of ourselves, right? We want people to see the best of us, but we want to hide and we want to, push away the darkness within us. We are not fully being complete and whole. And so we're not being authentic with who we are. Now, that isn't to say that you want to not acknowledge and not want to improve or, come into a fullness or a completion of self and in understanding there is ways in which you can be better, so to speak. But what you want to do is you have to accept both aspects of yourself. When you accept both aspects of yourself, then that's when you begin to peel away the excess, the unproductive thought patterns, the negative belief systems, the limiting belief systems, because it is in that darkness that you are pushing away that is causing you to actually have that limitation, have that unproductive paradigm or belief system. So once you take and you embrace the darkness with the light, then you are allowed to see where the emptiness within you is and what it is, and thus allowing you to actually see yourself completely, see yourself as a whole and complete being. And when you see yourself as whole and complete, then there is a expression or a feeling of love and acceptance. With that love and acceptance, that doesn't mean you settle. That doesn't mean you just simply allow. That means, since you are now looking at yourself as a whole and complete individual, a whole and complete being, you can then move forward in healing the darkness that is within you, thus allowing more light to shine and fill you up. You see? So think about this in terms of not only outside in nature, not only in the contrast of yin and yang, of consciousness and ego, but also the light and the dark within you as a means to acknowledging that both of those things make you whole and complete. When you acknowledge that you needing to accept and nurture those two aspects of yourself, that is where and when you actually let go of the darkness, so to speak. That is how you heal and fill that darkness. That is how you become and you understand who you truly are as a creator, but as divinity, as a divine being. And that is how you actually take the journey into that self-realization. Thank you so much. Feel free to go to drabundant.com, subscribe to my daily newsletter, and get a free download of this ebook, The Power Within. You will also be invited to my Manifestation Monday morning meetings that happen every Monday morning at 7 a.m. So make sure you set your alarms. Continue to join me on this journey. Peace and abundance always.